All right, good morning. This is Jeff Vorrock here at the National Weather Service office in Wakefield. Today is the Wednesday briefing talking about the potential severe weather and especially the flash flooding potential here over the next, today, tomorrow, and maybe even a little bit into Friday in the far southeast. So we'll kind of start detailing that and going through what we think is going to happen here over the next several days. Before we kind of really get into the whole thing of what's going on today and tomorrow, kind of wanted to show what happened yesterday. And really, models did a pretty good job. And I think we had the area pretty well nailed down yesterday. That the band of heavy rain and the severe weather was really going to be, from I'd say Farmville, up towards, almost Louisa, kind of an east west orientation here. That was going to extend across central Virginia and then over towards the eastern shore, including the Maryland eastern shore. So that's where the boundary set up yesterday, and the system is slowly starting to move its way south. So the expectation is that what you see here is slowly going to work its way south each day, a little bit further south today, a little bit further south again tomorrow, and then all the way down into North Carolina by the time we get into Friday, maybe getting into parts of Southside Hampton Road. So kind of shows you the flavor of what's happening as these showers and storms kind of just keep reloading back into the same weather system with a lot of moisture going on. But these are the rainfall totals. Again, you see some pretty good bullseyes in here. We had about 4 to 6 inches of rain reported across portions of Eastern Shore, and a lot of folks in the orange, it's widespread 2 inches of rain. And in the red, you're getting up to about maybe 3 to 4. So had some good rainfall yesterday. As far as the weather pattern goes, let's go ahead and just kind of show what's going on right now before we actually get into what the weather pattern is going to be overall. So this is currently what's happening with the radar. I'll zoom out here a little bit and I'll get a little bit bigger picture. Now this is just the Wakefield radar, so you can kind of see what's happening here. You can see how the system is oriented east to west here from Northampton County back across the peninsulas, over here through the Tri Cities, and eventually back here towards Charlotte Courthouse and back down towards Martinsville. So you kind of see here this is kind of where that boundary is setting up now. We just had some showers go through parts of Southside Hampton Roads and Virginia Beach. And so right now we're getting a little bit of a break in it. This thing should reload. It's kind of like the way the system just kind of it comes through. You get a little bit of a lull, it reloads, and then you get some more chances for heavy rainfall. And so we'll kind of walk through that. But that's what's going on right now with the radar. Looking at the satellite, it really shows up well on satellite. You can see what's going on here. Let me see if I can put this into motion. Here you go. You can really see that boundary with the clouds. So once you get, north of Richmond, quite a bit of sunshine and pretty fair weather up there. But once you get, I'd say southeast of Richmond, you would definitely see this boundary kind of sitting down here parked. And you can see a lot of convection, a lot of the high top thunderstorms here over parts of Western Virginia and all the way down into Tennessee. And so all that storm system that you see out there, with those bubbly tops, that bubbly look to it, that's all coming our way. So we're going to have a lull in it for right now, maybe for a little bit of the afternoon, and this whole system is going to reload as we get through later in today and tonight. But you can definitely see it's a pretty good sized system and extends way back into Tennessee, and it has shifted a little further south compared to this time yesterday. So kind of what we were expecting. Looking at the weather pattern over the next few days, kind of step through this really quickly. This afternoon, again, you see that weather system going from eastern Virginia all the way back into eastern Tennessee. The cold front itself is actually still way to the northwest, kind of back there towards the mountains, maybe getting up towards DC this afternoon. So we're well ahead of the front. The main heavy rainfall is occurring right ahead of the front. As we get into tonight, notice how the front hangs up. It doesn't really move a whole lot, and you keep this moisture feed coming out of Western Carolina and Tennessee that comes right up into Virginia, and so we're going to keep that moisture feed going tonight. Get into tomorrow morning. You do notice that front does start to kind of make its way down towards the coast, so we'll see how fast this moves down. But the problem we're going to run into is as that front pushes southeast later tonight and tomorrow morning, it's going to actually become a focus for even more heavy rainfall. So, even though we're going to get a lull maybe in the flood threat and maybe the severe threat this morning and early afternoon, this system is going to reload and could become pretty intense as we push through later tonight and even through, I'd say, the early morning hours on Thursday and maybe even Thursday morning during the commute. There could be some really intense rainfall as that front comes down and really starts to squeeze the atmosphere that's already pretty saturated with a lot of storms in it. So Thursday morning, late tonight, Thursday morning could be really interesting. We are concerned about a lot of heavy rain and flooding during that time. We get into Thursday night. Thursday evening, actually, and you see the systems trying to drop on down into basically Eastern Carolina. We'll see how fast it moves through. I don't know if it's going to move quite that quickly, but it will be dragging its way across Eastern Carolina as we get late in the day Thursday, especially Thursday night. Friday, again, we talked earlier about how this front kind of hangs up along the coast. So we're going to continue to see maybe some rain, could even be a little bit of heavy rain over Northeast North Carolina and maybe just south of Norfolk and Portsmouth, and maybe southern end of Virginia Beach, as that front stalls out there. So the more intense rain will probably be a little bit more down across, further down into Eastern Carolina, but Northeast North Carolina could still see an issue here on Friday. Saturday, again, hasn't moved a whole lot. Still going to be some continued showers, especially Northeast North Carolina, and things probably improve a little bit on Sunday, even though there's another wave of low pressure that tries to develop along the coast. So just an active pattern right now, a lot going on, and we're kind of concerned about really the next, I'd say, if I say 48 hours or so, especially the next, I'd say 24 to 36. We do have flood watches everywhere, pretty much at this point. There's a few counties up north that we don't have the flood watches out for, but really everybody's in the flood watch. We might be able to trim this back later on as confidence increases. We may be able to take out some of the northern counties, especially back here across parts of the Piedmont. We'll be assessing that through the day, but Eastern Shore, even maybe parts of the Maryland Eastern Shore, we may have to keep an eye out for how much rain gets back up there. But once you get, I'd say south and east of Richmond, that's we have some really high confidence that we're going to see continued rounds of heavy rain in those areas. Just kind of looking at the severe weather threat for today. Today is really our last, I'd say, severe weather threat day. Nothing going on right now. We'll see if we can get some more going this afternoon. But damaging winds the main threat. But really today is the only day that we're expecting any potential severe weather. Thursday, Friday, just some general thunderstorms. So, kind of outlining it for today, everybody is pretty much in a level 2 risk. This might get trimmed back a little bit here, a little bit later. Probably less of a risk once you get, I'd say, Richmond north, maybe even up over parts, of Maryland Eastern Shore. The threat's a little bit lower. So, if you drew a line from like Cumberland to Richmond to maybe Salisbury. From there north, I think there's probably a little bit less threat. But from there south, I think you're still going to have some threat there for some gusty winds, 45 to 60 mile per hour. Still an isolated tornado possible just because we've got the shear in the atmosphere, and the flooding is really the big threat. Here we'll talk about that in a minute. Again, talking about the actual threats today, no hail threat really. We did see some pretty big hail yesterday, but really not expecting that today. The atmosphere is just not as unstable with all that cloud cover that we're seeing. But we could still see some, isolated damaging wind here with some of the stronger storms. So that's the threat. Again, because of the shear, there is a low end tornado threat for maybe we could see an isolated tornado. It's a little bit less than what we saw yesterday as far as a tornado threat. We did have a number of the storms yesterday that did try to spin, especially in the afternoon, up there north of Richmond and up towards Maryland Eastern Shore, because there was a lot of shear and instability. We have the shear today, but not quite as much instability. That's why the tornado risk is a little bit lower than yesterday. So shifting gears into the heavy rain threat, a moderate risk was introduced yesterday. And this is really keying on later today and tonight, where we have a really good risk where some of that heavy rain may lock in. Here in the red, that's a moderate risk, but really we still have a slight risk that covers really a large part of the area. Again, Richmond's on the edge. Back towards Farmville, they still have the Maryland Eastern Shore in that slight risk because some rain might try to sneak up, especially up towards Worcester County and Ocean City. So I'll talk about that in a second. The moderate risk shifts to the southeast tomorrow, which is what we expect as that front starts to push further south. It's going to become a pretty good focus late today and tonight. And then by the time we get into early morning hours on Thursday and through the day Thursday, the heavy rain threat's really going to be the lower end of Eastern Shore down through Hampton Roads and those locations south and east. And I would say once you get, it's on the south side, Hampton Roads, from there south, the threat's going to be pretty significant, I think, tomorrow with this heavy rainfall as the thing shifts south and east. For Friday, with the front hanging up kind of along the coast, notice we still have a slight risk of some heavy rainfall, potential flooding for a good portion of northeast North Carolina. So those areas down there, going to see a lot of heavy rain, I'd say late tonight, early tomorrow morning, and through the day Thursday. And then could see some lingering showers there on Friday, continuing to cause some flooding issues as those rounds of heavy rainfall move through the region. So this is like kind of the simulated reflectivity here. We put this out in our forecast earlier. I'll kind of pull it over and step you guys through it. There's a lot of models. They're all saying something similar. I will say there's different variations of what's going on, but I'll take you through this one. This one seems to be doing a pretty decent job, and I'll back it up to the current time. And I think it's doing a pretty good job showing some of those showers moving across the south side and extending back to the southwest. It has a general area here pretty good, and it's showing this little bit of a break, between the showers that have been coming through here, now, and then the stuff developing back to the west all the way into eastern Tennessee. And if you move it through time, you do notice that break kind of continues here for a little while this afternoon. Just some hit or miss showers and storms across portions of the area. Especially across South Central Virginia, southeastern Virginia, and the Eastern Shore. This is about noon today or so. And as you go through the day, it does kind of blossom a little bit. We see the storms maybe kick up with an intensity. This is around 2 o'clock this afternoon. And that's just with heating. So you might expect some of these storms to kind of pop up, get a little stronger, pockets of heavy rain coming through. But then there's a break in it. And I think that's fair. There could be some breaks. The exact time of the break is kind of in question, but this is about, I'd say, 3 or 4 o'clock. We could see a little bit of a break in the showers. And then they do start to reload this evening. And you also start to see more development here with the actual cold front to the north. And so you're seeing these showers and storms popping up across Maryland Eastern Shore, back towards Fredericksburg. That is actually the front coming down. And then you still see this band of rainfall to the south of that. That's really across parts of central Virginia and eastern Virginia. So this is probably right roughly around, 5 o'clock or so, 6 o'clock this evening. And basically what happens is you'll notice all this kind of starts to congeal overnight. This takes us into about 9 o'clock tonight. Things are maybe starting to congeal a little bit, seeing more widespread showers and a few thunderstorms 9 o'clock tonight. As we continue through the overnight, you see things kind of really start to kind of continue to blossom and reload through the entire overnight hours. And this takes us through about, I'd say, about 4 or 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. Notice how we're seeing quite a bit of intense heavy rainfall across the area. Again, now what's happening is that front is pushing south, really starting to put a squeeze play on this existing band of rain that's already sitting down here. And so that continues through Thursday morning. The system just kind of continues to reload. This takes us to about 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Still a lot of heavy rainfall going on in a more solid band. Eventually, it does start to push its way down into northeast North Carolina. And so this is getting us into around noontime or so. Well, we'll see how fast this pushes south. It could be still a little bit further north. The bottom line is we could see some pretty good rainfall after midnight tonight through the early morning hours across a lot of the South Central Virginia, Eastern Virginia, especially Hampton Roads through daybreak, even into daybreak. This is 12 o'clock. As we push in a little bit later, again, it slowly tries to make its way, down into parts of North Carolina. This is now 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe Southside Hampton Road still has some good rain, and so does Northeast North Carolina. And then the system just kind of hangs up. And you notice here towards the end, it just keeps kind of reloading to our south. And some of this, here at the later periods here might still try to sneak up into Northeast North Carolina. So we'll have to watch out for that for Friday. But you really do get the flavor here. That today is kind of be maybe a little bit off and on with some of the thunderstorms. Maybe get a little bit of a break, and then things really get going. Maybe with some widespread heavy rainfall and flooding really later tonight, and really all the way through tomorrow morning for portions of the area. So something we're just going to have to watch out for. That's what it's looking like. As far as I've been showing this too, and I think this has been a nice way to look at how the heavy rain's moving across the area. This is that 6 hourly kind of maximum rainfall. So you look at a 6 hour period, and this is looking at a bunch of different high res models. And where do we expect the most intense heavy rainfall to be? And it's doing a pretty good job. This is at 11 a.m. showing that most of the heavy rainfall is probably going to be in the east. And that's where it is, with a little bit of a break and then some more stuff coming in from the west. So it's doing a pretty good job of that. Notice how it's just kind of spotty here for a while with some pockets of heavy rain through this afternoon and early evening. And you'll kind of notice it stays kind of spotty. This is 10 o'clock tonight. And then as you push in after midnight, you really start to see it blossom again with this heavier rainfall, where you might see some good maximum rates. So it does still clip that Maryland Eastern Shore. We talked about that. But once you get down to the southern end of Worcester and down through Eastern Shore, you're seeing a lot of maybe heavy rainfall. back to all of Hampton Roads, parts of the Middle Peninsula, maybe even back here towards Emporia. Northeast North Carolina is getting in on this. And then notice this is about 4 a.m. So this would be from like midnight to 4 a.m. in the morning, and it just keeps going. Notice how it almost kind of just keeps reloading here. This is 9 a.m. tomorrow. Does push a little bit further south into Northeast North Carolina, but notice it's still over Hampton Roads and it's still over the Eastern Shore. So again, this could be quite a bit of heavy rain for folks here in parts of the peninsula and Hampton Roads, as well as back toward Emporia and Northeast North Carolina. Eventually, this whole thing does start to kind of push a little bit more to the south. And at noontime, we still have some decent rain maybe across Hampton Roads, but Northeast North Carolina really into it at about noon as far as some of the heavier rainfall. And eventually, maybe by this is 2 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe by tomorrow evening, about 5 or 6, it finally really starts to push out of Northeast North Carolina. This is actually showing you 8 o'clock tomorrow evening. So we'll see how fast this pushes south, but that's kind of the way it's looking. And you kind of saw how long it locked up over parts of eastern Virginia and southeast Virginia. I did want to show this right here. You do notice how Northeast North Carolina starting to light up a little bit again here Friday morning. So I think the bulk of the heavy rain on Friday is going to be really to your south, but you do see a few little bullseyes here where you could see some higher rates, but nothing right now. It's not showing anything as intense as what you're going to have Thursday. But again, things are going to be saturated. Ground's going to be really wet. So any kind of good heavy rain on Friday down there might be able to cause some flooding issues. So it does kind of come back a little bit, even though it's not too bad on Friday, not as bad as Thursday. Just kind of look at the rainfall maps. We just kind of showing the average rate what the rainfall could be. Here through today and tonight. You see that 2 to 3 inches. We try to circle the area where we may see some of those higher rainfall rates, the more intense rainfall. That's what I just kind of showed you a minute ago. Again, for tomorrow, it starts out across Hampton Roads, especially in the morning, and it gradually pushes southeast across Northeast North Carolina. So again, some heavy rainfall, I think, up here at the peninsulas, Northampton, back towards Emporia in the morning for tomorrow morning, and then it gradually starts to push south into the Carolinas. And for Friday, again, not nearly as much rainfall. Again, I think we're really going to be keying on, I'd say Bertie County up through Chowan, just kind of those basically the sound counties. I think have the best probability of maybe seeing some heavy rainfall there on Friday. Could be a little bit intense in the early morning hours Friday, but it should be hopefully shifting a little further south through the day on Friday, and you guys will just be seeing some pockets of maybe a periodic heavy rainfall, but nothing maybe too bad, maybe not as bad as Thursday. And this is just looking at our totals across the area. I don't know if everybody's going to be getting in on this much. This is in addition to what's already occurred. So this does not take into account what happened yesterday. So this is what we're expecting today through really Friday. And so some pretty good totals here. I don't know if you'll get a widespread 4 to 6 inches across Carolina. It could be a widespread. I'd say at least 2 inches, probably a widespread 3 to 4, maybe up to 6. Somebody might be able to get 7. We'll see. Wallops Island out towards there this morning got close to 6 inches of rain, and that just occurred pretty much overnight. So if you get into one of those bands and it keeps training, yeah, you could quickly pick up 4 to 6 inches or more really quickly, even across Hampton Roads and back towards Emporia. I mean, if it comes in just right, we might get 4, 5, 6 inch, maybe even a stray 7 inch total. We'll see what happens. It depends on how it all loads up later tonight. But it's going to be some pretty good rainfall amounts. But again, once you get really, I'd say Farmville back to Richmond and Cambridge north, definitely less of a chance of heavy rainfall. They're pretty much getting out of the woods at this point. As far as just looking ahead, you see the rain chances do continue into Saturday, especially areas in the south and the east. Again, that's because that front is kind of getting stuck along the coast. Got a little wave of low pressure forming, so close to the coast. We're not really expecting any heavy rain threat right now on Saturday, but you do continue to see some rain chances even back here towards Suffolk. A lot of Hampton Roads, even Wakefield's got 40% chances even into Saturday. So going to keep some rain chances around, but the most intense rain should be well done by Saturday as of right now. For our coastal partners, we do have a moderate risk of rip currents, and with the front coming down tomorrow and with an east wind the next several days, the beaches are going to start to get a little bit rough. We'll have an onshore wind about 15 to 20 miles an hour going to kick things up. So we're going to have some moderate rip currents, basically for Thursday, Friday, and I think even into Saturday. It could be at least start out as kind of a rough day. The whole weekend may be kind of rough along the coast with a wave of low pressure kind of forming, over the Outer Banks. So it'll keep that wind out of the east and northeast, which will keep the waves and stuff kicked up. So maybe not going to be such a great swimming weekend along the beach with that continuous moderate threat of rip currents. Real quickly, I'm just going to hit the marine just for some of the marine partners. Only thing I want to really highlight here is the fact that we do have widespread small craft advisory conditions today. The red represents potential for gale conditions well offshore. We talked about that yesterday near the canyons. For Thursday, you see that the bay here is still lit up orange, and so that's suggesting maybe some small craft advisory conditions on the bay, and that'll be in the morning when that cold front pushes south. In the Thursday morning to early afternoon, winds are going to go north to northeast, and they're probably going to be blowing about 15 to 20 knots, maybe even I don't know if you get a gust of 25, but it's going to be a good 15 to 20 knots out of the north and northeast. And so that's why I think we're going to potentially see some small craft advisory conditions Thursday morning and maybe into early afternoon on the bay. But conditions do improve. Winds do decrease to about 15 knots or less for the most part, even though the winds do remain out of the east. So it'll keep the seas bumped up, but the winds will be decreasing. I did want to kind of highlight here the area in orange. That's where we have the probability of maybe seeing some gale conditions. So once you get beyond 20 nautical miles, you get past the wind farm, and you start to get out here towards the Hatteras Canyon, and maybe even a little bit to Baltimore Canyon. You're starting to see that higher probability here in the middle slide of gale conditions. And the red represents a high probability of gale conditions. So once you get east of the North Carolina, Virginia border, further out, a much better probability that you'll see some gale force wind gusts. So maybe some higher winds further offshore, but we're not really expecting any gale conditions near shore or in the Chesapeake Bay. Again, this just kind of shows you that those winds. Oh, I did kind of want to highlight the fact that here on Thursday, you see those winds go from basically west to north. And if you look at a lot of these bay stations here, you'll notice in a lot of gusts here at about maybe 20 knots. So that's that brief period there, maybe some small craft advisory conditions Thursday morning. When you get in the afternoon, it does look like the winds are going to decrease and they'll start to come out of the east. And then you'll just pretty much notice winds stay out of the east and northeast really through the entire forecast all the way into the weekend. And that's not going to change. Even into, let me jump ahead, even into Sunday, the winds here stay out of the north. Even though they're kind of light, it's still going to have that onshore flow. And the winds go back to the southwest again here on Monday. So that may keep the seas kicked up a little bit. And you kind of see our waves and sea forecast here for the next several days. So some pretty good seas. That's near shore and getting offshore, getting up to maybe 7 feet, occasionally maybe even getting up to about 10 feet or so way offshore. So that's it for today. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.